I was mowing the grass when it happened. It was approaching July, and Grandpa's property was small but in constant need of a cut. The rains had been numerous in the last few months, the lightning cutting the sky with long forks that shook the mountains most nights, and Grandpa's grass would be ankle-deep by next Friday if this kept up. I didn't really mind mowing the half-acre that held Grandpa's house, but the acre in the down below that he also owned was full of stones and roots that would make the endeavor treacherous. I was cutting around the back of the house when I suddenly heard the sound of a flute. I picked my head up, the setting sun making me squint as I looked at the woods. The flute was high, something about it sounding almost magical, and I felt my feet taking me towards the dark mouth of the forest. I was like those children in the story about the mice, and with each step I felt less in control of myself. I began to sway a little, the charms and the wards that had been slow to come to my mind, now falling hollowly away in the face of such a draw. I had just passed into the shadowy embrace of the forest canopy when someone tackled me around the waist and pushed me to the ground. I struggled against the person, my feet jouncing in tune with the flute, but as the music began to move away, I looked up to find that Glimmer sat atop me. Hell of a greeting, Glimmer, as usual. I expected to see her childish smile full of mischief, but her face was absolutely dour.
You are lucky I came to rescue, Hunter. What were you thinking? Following the fairy pipes into the woods? You could have been killed.
Good thing you were here to save me from the woodwind section, I said, a little flippantly, though I meant it in jest. What's all the ruckus? Came a voice from the house, and Grandpa came stumping onto the porch. He looked concerned, but it was tinged with good humor at the sight of us rolling in the grass clippings. Clearly, he thought he had come across something a little more intimate, but one look at Glimmer cleared that right up.
Hunter was about to follow the Faye music into the woods,
Glimmer stated matter-of-factly as she helped me get up. Jesus, boy, didn't I teach you better than that? What in the hell is Faye music? I asked, now completely confused as I wiped grass clippings off myself. Grandpa started to look cross, but then scratched his chin as he thought about it. Have I never told you about the Faye music? Fairy lights, yes. Faye music, no, I said. Glimmer turned her angry look upon Grandpa now.
Fisher, how could you not warn him? You know how devious they are.
Well, excuse me, Grandpa huffed, throwing his hands up. There's a lot of things in the woods that could kill any one of us, and not all of them are magical or unknown. A few minutes later, as the sun settled into the dying light of the day, and our drinks sat sweating in their cup holders, we sat on the porch as Grandpa told me about what had nearly ended my life. Faye music isn't actually of the Fae, Grandpa amended, but that's what Glimmer's always called it.
It is what Father always called them, and just because it's not connected to the fairy courts doesn't mean it isn't of Fae.
Are you ever going to elaborate on these fairy courts that you keep talking about? I asked, more curious about them than the weird forest music. Focus, Hoss. We ain't talking about fairies tonight. The Fae music is disembodied music that guides people into the woods so that whatever is causing it can take them away and do whatever it intends to do with them. Wait, so does it kill them or just take them?
No one knows. Those who are taken never return. Whether they are devoured by whatever plays the music or simply takes them to Fae for sport, no one ever returns.
I took a long sip as I thought that over, not sure what to say about it. It isn't even native to the Appalachian area. I first encountered it in Alaska, and other people have reported hearing it in the desert, while at sea, and one in the tundras of Siberia. Whatever it is, it's greedy, and it's hungry. Glimmer looked up from the condensation on the side of her bottle, loving to watch the moisture trail as it slid down.
Wait, you never told me that you heard the fairy pipes in this Alaska place.
Yup, one night while I was drinking with John, actually. He started to take a sip, but stopped as he noticed us eyeing him intently. What?
Nothing. This is just usually when you tell us another of your stories about times gone by.
Yeah, we just assumed you were setting us up for a Grandpa story. Grandpa drained his beer in a single long pull before tossing the bottle over his shoulder, where it bounced off a tree and fell without breaking. I mean, if you insist, it all started much like this, with lukewarm beer and good friends telling tales on John's porch. John and I were sitting on the porch with two of his younger cousins. Both were in high school and were visiting for the summer, and the four of us were sharing tales. The oldest of the two, Moss, was telling us about how he'd been fishing in his kayak when something had bumped him and made him lose his paddle. After a few hours of aimless floating, he had been pushed back to shore by something and hadn't taken to the water again since. Could have been a whale or an orca, I suppose, but Da always figured it was the Kushtaka. They had probably taken my oar to begin with and then felt bad about it after the fact when they realized I'd drift off into the ocean. We sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping our beers and contemplating. That night, however, only one great mystery had my mind, and that was whether I could make it to the edge of the woods before my bladder burst. I had become gripped by a sudden and monstrous need to make water, and now that the story was told, it had reared its head like a breaching whale to remind me that it was here and must be served. I excused myself, leaving my bottle on the porch rail and high-stepping it to the woods as my drinking mates laughed behind me. I hit the edge of the trees, unzipped, and let fly as my groaning innards sighed happily. The night beyond the porch was lit by little besides the moon, and as I watched the trees sway in the light wind, I couldn't help but shudder a little. After the fairy lights, I didn't much like to be in the woods at night, and these woods were as far from my woods as they got. Everything from the stony soil to the strange trees made me feel like an explorer in a foreign land. I had just finished, my zipper still halfway up, when I heard the first halting refrains of the last thing I had expected. It was a piano, and it was playing something deep and haunting. I looked back towards the collection of houses, expecting to hear it coming from somebody's open window, but when I looked back, I realized it was coming from the woods. It was music played by a master, someone who had perfected their craft over years and decades and millennia. I took a curious step forward, wanting to see if it was a real piano or just someone with a radio, but that step became another as my curious feet brought me into the dark woods. The moon was muted here, the ground a mystery that my feet seemed to understand better than I did. I went a little deeper, the music calling me to explore, and before I knew it, the warm glow of civilization was nothing but a suggestion behind me. That was when I realized something more than piano music might be going on here. Whatever curiosity had taken me was beginning to ebb as the memories of my last moonlit stroll reasserted themselves. Had my chase with the fairy lights really been so different? My drunken friends and I had gone tripping through the woods as we chased our death, and only I had come back again. Whatever this was, I feared it meant to do the same thing, and though I pulled against it, I was powerless to stop my feet from pulling me ceaselessly forward. I tried to reach out for a nearby tree, but it appeared my arms were outside my control as well. I was a fly in the spider's web, a bug in the mouth of a fly trap, and I was walking straight into danger. The song played on, never ending, and although I had to be getting closer, the volume of the music never increased. It was like the insectile ree of the cricket, and it seemed always out of sight and out of reach. I went on and on, the piano and its player never coming into focus, and that might have been all that saved my life in the end. I don't know how long I walked, but it had to be about an hour. I had been barefoot, and though my feet knew the path, they didn't seem to care if the path was over sharp rocks or through summer thorns. I tried to cry out, but my mouth didn't work either. My legs and feet were soon battered and bleeding, and I suppose that if they noticed me gone, their dogs might have a good fresh trail to lead them to the scene of my demise. As if summoned by my thoughts, I began to hear voices. I wondered if it was part of the music for a moment, but when John's voice rose to call my name, I tried to call back to him. My vocal cords, however, were just as useless as they had been when I stubbed my toe or cut my leg. I could only manage a useless mewling sound and prayed that maybe my feet would lead them to me as I crunched along. John's voice sounded miles away, his cousin's farther than that, and as I continued to cry out, I tried to get control of my body again. Just my voice, that would be all I would need. Just a yelp or a yell, and they'd be able to find me. Just a shout or a noise, and they'd know where I was. I could hear them getting closer. At least John was, and the more I tried to yell, the less seemed to come out. I closed my eyes, trying to summon all my strength, but I was powerless to stop this. Was this really how I was going to die? I thought. I'd stood against the bone collector. I'd stood up to ghosts and survived. I'd been brave enough to sign up to take part in a war that took me farther from home than I'd ever been. I'd done all these things, and this was how I was going to shake out. It didn't seem fair. Why let me overcome so much just to die like this? Little did I know that dying wasn't what fate had in mind for me. "You lost, boy?" I opened my eyes just as something poked me straight in the forehead. A little old man was standing in front of me, his weathered face looking like a canvas of age. He was stooped, his gnarled hands wrapped around a wooden walking stick, and my eyes crossed as I tried to focus on the large, wrinkled finger that sat square in the middle of my forehead. I took a moment to notice that the music had ceased, to be replaced by the sounds of insects as the forest came back to life. What did you do?" I half whispered, stepping back with a harsh jerk as I pulled away from his finger. "Got 'em out of your head," the old man said. John called out again, and I found that I was able to answer him this time. I called out, letting them know that I was here. I expected to turn back and find the old man gone. That was usually how it worked, but I jumped a little when I turned back to find him, still standing there. He was looking at me strangely, his head cocked a little to the side, like a dog with a scent. "Not your first time stumbling across the unknown, I'd say?" the old man asked, and he grinned toothlessly when I nodded. "You must be the young man living with my nephew and his family." I started to ask what he meant, but John came out of the bush then and asked if I was okay. We got scared when you never came back. Then Moss started heading into the woods, and I suspected it might be, but he noticed the strange man then, and his face split into a smile. "Great Uncle Nat, it's good to see you. Did you have a good trip?" "I did, nephew. I see you've made a new friend." He looked at me then, smiling wetly before saying, "Come to my trailer when you have a free moment. I would be very interested to know what sort of knowledge we might trade." He stumped past us, making his way easily through the woods as John and I watched. That was how I learned about the Faye music, what the natives call spirit noises, and met John's great uncle Nat. He was a man I would come to admire and learn much more from. The crickets in our own wood made a fantastic background as Grandpa's story came to an end. We were left sitting there, listening to the night unfurl around us, before it was broken by the sound of a smashing bottle. Grandpa had launched another beer bottle into the woods before settling back in his lawn chair. Nat would sort of become my mentor, as Grandma once had. I would learn a lot from Nat, and it was all things I would bring back to Appalachia when I eventually returned. I would hear the fairy music again when I returned, but I was ready then, and it never trapped me like that again. I leaned my head against Glimmer's, listening for the music I had heard earlier, and glad not to hear it. Appalachia is a magical place, but it can be unforgiving. I resigned myself to be more steadfast in my studies with Grandpa. I wanted to be ready the next time I heard the pipes. Hey there, everybody. It's Dr. Plague, just popping in at the end to say a very special thanks to our guest voice tonight, Dama De Blanca. For my Spanish-speaking listeners, she narrates creepypastas in Spanish, so if you'd like to listen to her, I'll leave a link below to her channel. I'm sure some of you have found me through there. She's really fond of my stories, and she likes to narrate them. I was so honored to have her reprise her role as Glimmer, and it's always a pleasure to have her on the show. Thanks, Dama. My grandpa stories just wouldn't be the same without you as the voice of Glimmer. Alright, let's roll those end credits. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the ghostly reader tier since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.